The howling wind carried the scent of blood. Jeremiah Buck Mason stood motionless in the blinding snow, his weathered face cut by ice crystals that stung like tiny blades. The wolf lay dead at his feet, its gray coat already disappearing beneath the gathering white. Buck's breath fogged in the bitter cold as he stared at the carcass, his rifle still warm in his gloved hands. "Just a scout," he muttered, eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness beyond his lantern's glow. The real pack's still out there. At 45, Buck Mason had developed instincts sharper than most men half his age. 20 years in Special Forces during the Gulf War had taught him that danger rarely arrived alone. He'd seen enough death to know it was often just the herald of something worse. The wind shifted, howling across the Wyoming plains with renewed fury. Buck shouldered his rifle and turned toward the ranch house, its windows glowing like distant beacons through the storm. With each step through knee-deep snow, his mind tallied the growing list of threats: wolves picking off his cattle, the worst winter in 30 years, and a bank notice that threatened to take everything he'd built since leaving the service. The banker's letter burned in his pocket like a hot coal. 30 days. After 3 decades of service to his country and 5 years of back-breaking work on this land, some suit in a warm office had given him 30 days before they'd take it all away. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline white. Buck rode along his property line, counting the cattle that had survived the night. The morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden: 3 more cows lost to the wolves, their carcasses half buried in blood-stained snow. Each dead animal pushed him closer to financial ruin. It was then, as he rounded the bend by the old cottonwood grove, that he heard it, a faint cry carried on the bitter wind. Buck reined in his horse, head cocked, listening. There it came again, unmistakably human. He found her beneath a fallen pine, half buried in snow. A woman, Hispanic, early 30s, her face contorted in pain. Her jeans were torn and bloodied at the thigh, and her horse was nowhere to be seen. "Don't move," Buck commanded, dismounting carefully, his eyes scanning the tree line. Old instincts died hard. In these remote parts, strangers were rarely good news. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, "I need help." Buck knelt beside her, assessing her injuries with practiced efficiency. A deep bruise bloomed purple on her hip, and a nasty gash ran along her thigh. But as he moved her coat to check for other injuries, his hand froze. The butt of a 9mm pistol protruded from an inside pocket, and beneath her collar, he glimpsed the telltale scar of a bullet wound, old but unmistakable. Their eyes met, and in that moment, understanding passed between them. She wasn't just some lost traveler. "You want to tell me who you're running from?" Buck asked, his voice as cold as the air between them. Her dark eyes studied him, calculating, weighing options. "Victor Delgado," she finally said. "Mexican cartel. He'll kill me if he finds me." Buck's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of drug runners using these remote ranches as transit points. The cartels were moving north, spreading like a cancer through the borderlands and beyond. "Got a name?" he asked, helping her to her feet despite his misgivings. "Elena Reyes." She winced, leaning heavily against him. As Buck lifted her onto his horse, he noticed something that made the hair on his neck stand up: fresh hoofprints in the new snow, cutting across his land from the south. Someone had been tracking her. The ride back to the ranch was silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath the horse's hooves and Elena's labored breathing. Buck's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon, watchful for wolves of both the 4-legged and 2-legged variety. By the time they reached the weathered ranch house, Elena's face had grown pale with pain and cold. Buck helped her inside, settling her on the worn leather couch before stacking wood in the fireplace. As flames licked upward, casting dancing shadows across the room's log walls, he finally spoke. "My wife picked that couch," he said, his back to Elena as he stoked the fire. "Cancer took her 3 years ago. Now the bank wants to take everything else." He turned to face her, eyes hard as flint. "I've got 30 days before they foreclose." So whatever trouble you're in, I don't need it finding me here. Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. I understand. I'll be gone tomorrow. Bug nodded, then set about cleaning and bandaging her wound with the efficiency of a combat medic. Neither spoke of the gun she carried, nor of the fresh tracks in the snow. Some truths were better left unspoken in the light of day. Night fell like a shroud over the ranch. Buck had given Elena the spare bedroom, keeping his own counsel and his rifle close at hand. Sleep eluded him, his mind cycling through memories of ambushes in distant deserts and the more recent threat of the banker's letter. It was just past midnight when he heard the soft murmur of Spanish from behind Elena's closed door. Buck moved silently down the hallway, years of training guiding his steps. Through the cracked door, he saw Elena hunched over a map spread across the bed, speaking urgently into a satellite phone. His hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip. He could confront her now, demand answers. Instead, he retreated to the gun cabinet in his bedroom, unlocking it with practiced movements. Whatever storm was coming, he'd be ready. Morning brought clear skies and a fresh blanket of snow. Elena emerged from her room to find Buck frying eggs on the ancient stove, his rifle propped against the counter within easy reach. Your legs should be strong enough to ride today, he said without turning. I'll lend you a horse. Town's about 15 miles east. Elena opened her mouth to respond when the distant sound of an approaching engine cut through the stillness. Buck moved to the window, tension visible in the set of his shoulders. Stay inside, he ordered, grabbing his rifle and stepping onto the porch. The approaching vehicle was a sheriff's department SUV, its tires crunching through the fresh snow. Buck recognized the driver immediately, Jim Holden, county sheriff and former Army Ranger. They'd served together briefly during the Gulf War, before their paths diverged. Buck, Jim nodded as he stepped from the vehicle. At 50, the sheriff carried extra weight around his middle, but his eyes remained sharp beneath his worn Stetson. Heard you lost some cattle to the wolves. 3 more last night, Buck confirmed, rifle held casually but ready. Didn't think that rated a personal visit from the sheriff. Jim's weathered face creased into a frown. It doesn't. Got word from Border Patrol about a cartel crew moving through the area. Delgado's bunch. Mean sons of bitches. Thought you should know. Buck's expression revealed nothing, but his mind raced. Elena had mentioned Delgado. This was no coincidence. Appreciate the heads up, he said evenly. Seen anything unusual myself? Jim's eyes flickered toward the house. You sure about that, Buck? You were always a terrible liar, even back in the sandbox. Before Buck could respond, the ranch house door opened and Elena stepped onto the porch. The sheriff's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm before stopping halfway. Didn't realize you had company, Jim said, his tone neutral but his eyes calculating. Miss Reyes had an accident yesterday, Buck explained. Horse threw her during the storm. I found her half frozen by the east fence line. Jim nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Elena. Ma'am, he acknowledged, that's quite a piece of bad luck, ending up out here in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard. I'm very fortunate Mr. Mason found me, Elena replied, her accent more pronounced than it had been with Buck. After Jim departed with a promise to check in soon, Buck rounded on Elena, his patience exhausted. You got exactly 1 minute to tell me what the hell is really going on, he demanded. Elena's posture changed, the vulnerable victim vanishing in an instant. I'm DEA, she said flatly, undercover, tracking Victor Delgado. He's using ranches in this area to move product north. Buck's eyes narrowed. You expect me to believe that? Check my credentials, she challenged, reaching slowly into her boot and extracting a slim leather wallet. Agent Elena Reyes, 5 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration. My partner was killed 3 weeks ago. Delgado has someone inside the agency. That's how they found us. Buck examined the badge, turning it over in his calloused hands. So why are you here, Agent Reyes? On my land? I wasn't planning to be, she admitted. I was following a lead when they spotted me. I barely escaped with my life and the evidence. She patted her jacket pocket meaningfully. a USB drive with enough information to bring down Delgado's operation and expose his contacts in law enforcement. Buck handed back her credentials, his expression unreadable. And now you've brought this war to my doorstep. Before Elena could respond, Buck's satellite phone rang. Jim Holden's number flashed on the screen. "Mason?" Buck answered. Jim's voice crackled through the connection. "Ran a check on your guest, Buck. She's DEA all right, but there's more. She's under internal investigation. Word is she might be on Delgado's payroll." Buck's eyes locked with Elena's as Jim continued. "Be careful, buddy. I'm heading back your way with backup." The call ended, leaving a heavy silence. "He's lying," Elena said quietly. "Jim Holden is the mole. He's working for Delgado." Buck's hand tightened on his rifle. "Convenient accusation. Why do you think he ran a check on me so quickly? How did he even know I was here? You didn't tell him my name." Elena stepped closer. "He's coming back to kill us both and take the evidence." Before Buck could respond, his perimeter alarm chimed. Motion sensors along the fence line had been triggered. He moved to the window, scanning the tree line through his rifle scope. 3 men on horseback were approaching from the south, rifles visible across their saddles. "Looks like we're about to find out who's telling the truth," Buck muttered. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Buck moved with the precision of a man who had prepared for siege before, positioning rifles at key windows, checking ammunition, and calculating fields of fire. "They'll come at dusk," he predicted, checking the hunting watch on his wrist. 2 hours. Elena watched him work, her own movements equally practiced. "You believe me now?" Buck paused, studying her for a long moment. "Let's just say I'm hedging my bets. Jim or no Jim, those men out there aren't coming for a friendly visit." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered pasture, Buck outlined his defensive strategy. The ranch house sat on a slight rise, giving them good visibility in all directions. The barn and workshop provided potential cover for attackers, but also created choke points that could work to their advantage. "I've got claymore mines from my service days," Buck explained, indicating small remote detonators on the kitchen table. "Set them up along the most likely approach routes." Elena raised an eyebrow. "That's not standard ranch equipment." Buck's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Wyoming ranchers tend to believe in being prepared. Dusk brought the expected attack. The first explosion rattled the windows as one of Buck's improvised devices caught the initial attackers by surprise. Gunfire erupted immediately afterward, bullets splintering wood and shattering glass as Buck and Elena took up defensive positions. "2 down," Buck called over the din. "At least 4 more, plus whoever's coming with Jim." Elena fired through a broken window, her shots measured and precise. "If Holden's involved, he'll hold back until the initial assault weakens us." The firefight intensified as the attackers pressed closer, using the barn and outbuildings for cover. Buck moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man, changing positions, taking shots of opportunity, never staying still long enough to present a target. A bullet grazed Elena's arm, drawing a hiss of pain but no retreat. She returned fire, dropping an attacker who had broken cover to rush the house. "Running low," she reported, checking her ammunition. Buck tossed her a spare magazine. "Make it count." The assault paused briefly as darkness fell completely. Buck used the respite to treat Elena's wound and reposition their defenses. The attackers would likely use night vision equipment for the next wave, an advantage he'd prepared for. "When I hit the lights, they'll be momentarily blinded," he explained, indicating floodlights mounted on the roof. "That's when we move." Elena nodded, her face grim in the dim light. "And if Jim arrives with reinforcements?" "Then we're probably dead," Buck answered matter-of-factly. "But I've never been one to lie down without a fight." The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the night headlights, sweeping across the property as 3 SUVs pulled up the long driveway. "Showtime," Buck muttered, finger hovering over the light switch. The floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the snowy landscape in harsh white light. Through his rifle scope, Buck could see Jim emerging from the lead vehicle, flanked by deputies and men who didn't look like law enforcement. "Buck," Jim called out, "these men are federal agents. The woman is a fugitive. Send her out, and we can resolve this peacefully." Buck glanced at Elena, whose face had hardened into a mask of determination. "He's lying," she whispered. "Those men with him aren't agents." In that moment, Buck made his decision. 20 years in Special Forces had taught him to read people, to sense deception. Jim's story didn't add up, arriving too quickly with too many men for a routine fugitive situation. "Sorry, Jim," Buck called back. "I'm not in a trusting mood today." What followed was chaos, a coordinated assault on the ranch house from multiple directions. Buck triggered his remaining explosives, creating momentary confusion among the attackers. He and Elena used the distraction to deadly effect, their shots finding targets with practiced precision. But they were outnumbered. A flashbang grenade shattered the momentary advantage, leaving Buck temporarily disoriented. Through ringing ears, he heard the front door splinter. Jim Holden stood in the doorway, pistol raised. "Should have played along, Buck," he said, genuine regret in his voice. "Wasn't personal until you made it so." Buck's vision cleared in time to see Elena emerge from the shadows behind Jim, her gun pressed against the sheriff's head. "Drop it," she ordered. Jim froze, then slowly lowered his weapon. "You're making a mistake, Mason," he said. "This woman is playing you. Ask her about the $2 million in her offshore account." Elena's face revealed nothing, but her grip on the gun tightened. "Tell him the truth, Jim. Tell him who's really on Delgado's payroll." The standoff lasted only seconds before one of Jim's men burst through the back door. Buck reacted instinctively, tackling Elena aside as gunfire erupted. Jim seized the opportunity, diving for his dropped weapon. The ensuing firefight destroyed what remained of the ranch house's interior. Buck took a bullet to the shoulder but managed to drop Jim's deputy with a shot to the chest. Elena engaged Jim directly, their struggle carrying them into the kitchen. Buck followed, blood soaking his shirt, in time to see Jim gain the upper hand, slamming Elena against the counter and raising his gun. "It's over," Jim growled. Buck's knife found Jim's back before the sheriff could pull the trigger. The blade, the same one Buck had carried through 3 combat tours, slid between ribs with practiced efficiency. Jim's eyes widened in shock, then understanding. "You always were. Too damn loyal," he gasped, before collapsing to the floor. The silence that followed seemed deafening. Outside, engines started as the surviving attackers retreated into the night. Buck helped Elena to her feet, both of them bloodied but alive. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Buck grunted, pressing a dish towel against his wounded shoulder. "Figured if one of us was lying, it probably wasn't the one Delgado's men were trying to kill." Dawn revealed the full extent of the destruction, the ranch house riddled with bullets, 2 outbuildings burned to the ground, and 7 bodies scattered across the property. Elena placed a call on her satellite phone, using authorization codes that brought a DEA helicopter within the hour. As federal agents secured the scene, Elena approached Buck, who sat on his porch steps, watching the sun climb over distant mountains. "The evidence on the USB drive clears my name and implicates Delgado's entire network," she explained. "Including the bank manager who was accelerating your foreclosure, he was laundering money through property seizures." Buck nodded, unsurprised. "And my ranch?" "The foreclosure will be canceled," Elena confirmed. "The agency also wants to offer compensation for the damage and your assistance." Buck gazed across his land, the pastures where his cattle grazed. The mountains beyond that had called to him since childhood. "I don't need their money," he said finally. "Just my land." Elena hesitated, then sat beside him on the steps. "What will you do now?" Buck's weathered face creased into something resembling a smile. "Rebuild. Been doing it my whole life. Fix the house. Train some dogs to help with the wolves." "You could use some help," Elena suggested cautiously. Buck glanced at her, measuring. "You sticking around?" "I have debriefings, court appearances," she admitted. "But after that, I might be due for a change of scenery." Buck nodded, returning his gaze to the horizon. "Wolves will still be here. So will I." The helicopter departed hours later, carrying the bodies and evidence, but leaving Elena behind to coordinate the ongoing investigation. As darkness fell once more, Buck stood on the hill overlooking his battered ranch. Tomorrow would bring contractors, insurance adjusters, and the beginning of restoration. But for now, he simply watched as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. The storm, both literal and figurative, had passed. His land remained. And for the first time since burying his wife, Buck Mason allowed himself to consider the possibility of a future beyond mere survival. In the distance, a wolf howled, a reminder that some threats never truly disappeared. Buck smiled grimly, chambering a round in his rifle. Let him come. He was ready.